All right, we're back. Here it is. It is Branching Factor episode 007. We've made it this far. Very, very excited. I'm your host, Tommy Thompson, and of course, joining me today is our own shaken but not stirred secret game development agent. It is Quang. How you doing, sir?
Hello there. I'm doing all right actually. Mostly stressed, mostly working busy hard, but surviving, which is the main thing.
Sounds about the same. How you doing with the heat actually? Because we're recording this. The British summertime has started, and yeah.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, the UK isn't designed to deal with the heat very well at all.
No.
Our homes are designed to hold the heat in rather than aircon. We don't have aircon basically. So
funnily enough, I was just chatting about this. We have one of the studios I'm working for. We have a lot of folk who are out in the US, but we also have folk who are out in Asia. And they were like, "Why don't you have this? Like, have you not got like a ceiling fan, or have you not got air conditioning or something?" And I was like, "Yeah, like this is the problem with like, sorry, we're completely derailing this podcast by just talking about British housing, but like British homes." Are rubbish. They're not very good at keeping the heat in that they generate. So in the winter, your house gets cold too easily. But also, like heat that's coming from the outside, it doesn't keep that out. So in the summer, they turn into, death traps. And so, we're not even hitting the hottest part of the year yet. I think it's only like it hit like 32 Celsius or something, which for our American friends, that's like 80 Fahrenheit, low 80s. Like last summer we set a record. Congratulations, Britain. We set a record courtesy of climate change where we hit 41. So it was about 100 and change Fahrenheit, 100 plus Fahrenheit. That was not fun. I had tinfoil over all my windows. I looked like a proper psychopath. Denying all the light. Anyway, but yes, this is the Branching Factor podcast where we're here because it's another gaming podcast because we figured there isn't enough already. But we're here to demystify all things about games in a kind of slightly intelligent and hopefully entertaining way. And so this week, for this episode, or this month for this episode, we're coming back to talking about retro games, particularly with Quang. When we had our one-to-one episode back when the podcast started, we were talking about your experiences and critically a lot of the work you're doing in Game Boy games and homebrew, building your own games, shipping your own games, and you're knee deep in it right now, as I recall. How's it going? Yeah. How's it going right now?
Oh, we're getting there. It's a slow struggle. One of the big things with development on the old systems is how the limitations. Every time you think you're getting somewhere, you run out of memory here, and so you have to shuffle a bunch of code from here to there. That upsetting the code base. And then you have a bit more space to work with, and then you add more stuff, and then you run out of code again, space again, and you're constantly shuffling code back and forth, trying not to upset things so it doesn't fall to pieces. It's like a big game of Jenga, really.
And it is a kind of a different, it's a different reality versus working on contemporary hardware. Like some of the stuff I've been doing recently, where we're thinking about, well, if we want to port this game to Switch, we need to set these kind of technical benchmarks for ourselves. Actually, like there was a prototype that we were working on over at Spilt Milk Studios that we were looking to pitch for funding, and we actually were working on making sure getting that run on a Steam Deck smoothly at like high frame rate. But these are computational powerhouses versus the types of hardware like you're working on because you're on the Game Boy, which is like what 30 odd years old at this point. And so funnily enough, this actually brings us to our guests we have on the podcast this week. Quang was able to reach out and convince so we've got the Bitmap Bureau are coming to join us. It's Mike Tucker and Gavin Bell from over at the Bitmap Bureau, who are an indie game studio based here in the UK, who have done a whole selection of really interesting work. Starting out with their first, I'm trying to think, it's like 5 games I think they've done since 2017. They did 88 Heroes and Ninja Showdown. They're probably most well known for Xeno Crisis, which came out in 2019, but it was kickstarted to the tune of around £75,000. But what was interesting about it was that it was targeting the Sega Mega Drive, which for our American friends, that's the Sega Genesis. So this is a very old piece of hardware. Now, subsequently, this game has then been released on not just It's been released on contemporary platforms. You can play it on the PlayStation 4 and 5. You can play it on the Xbox One and the Xbox Series S and X. It's on the Nintendo Switch. But they shipped it to the Mega Drive. Then they also shipped it to the Dreamcast, the PS Vita, the Neo Geo, the Nintendo 64. Like, it's an absolutely bonkers concept. And so, the team were happy enough to come down and have a chat with us about their experiences. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what they have to say. Like Quang, how did you actually meet like Mike, and I guess it was Matt as well, who's like the technical director?
Yeah, so actually I ran into Mike at one of the gaming shows. I think it was EGX in Birmingham. We were chatting. I was chatting away to a bunch of other indie devs who were showcasing there. So when I was showcasing my old game, Mau Castle, I did so many events. It was unreal. Probably over 65 events with Mau Castle, and you would go to the local bar after the event just to wind down and chat with the other guys. And some guy taps me on the shoulder and goes, "Hey, you're Quang, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm Quang." And he goes, "Oh, I've seen all your stuff because I'm quite well known in the retro gaming scene for collecting and owning all these consoles." But yeah, me and Mike started chatting about all the retro stuff, and I had no idea who he was at the time. But as we got chatting, then they were talking about how they're going to be making stuff for Mega Drive because they had just done this game jam, and it was just then we just got super nerdy about the whole thing and making retro games in a modern time.
You know, just thinking about meeting people at events, you know, your phone library, like your camera library does that whole, hey, do you remember this happened X number of years ago? So in the past week, I've had my phone remind me that I was at E3 10 years ago. And it's like, all right, well, that's cool. But actually, the thing I was more fond of was I kept seeing photographs of the Norwich Gaming Festival. Which I think that's probably one of the first times that you and I really got to hang out quite a bit was at Norwich because you were showing Mal Mal and we had sure footing there. And you know what I really miss? I don't miss going to the big ones. Like, funnily enough, I went back to like WASD. I was at GDC and stuff like that. But like, I miss the little indie events. Like, I'm hoping that those are coming back strong. I think in the next year or so after the pandemic and everything else has calmed down a little. But like I know Norwich is dead now, which it made me sad. I was like, oh man, those were some good times. Some good times. It's mostly chicken wings, now that I think about it.
But it comes down to those little social things. So it wasn't necessarily going there to show your game. It was more to hang out with other developers, and and that was a big part of it.
That was why I loved Norwich. Like there was bigger events we went to for the purposes of showing your game because you wanted to get attention on it, like going to like EGX Rest or the main EGX or even Insomnia or something like that. Like those are much larger scale. There was more chance that you actually bumped into biz dev people. Like literally interactions with like Xbox and Nintendo I had when I was at EGX. But Norwich was just a social. It was good fun. Like actually, full disclosure, I did a bunch of additional work for the festival that I often got paid to do, but like I then stuck around and did the rest of demoing our game just because we were having fun, and just the amount of developers we met at that event alone that I'm still bumping into years later, who are thankfully still in the industry and still doing well for themselves. That warms this old heart. Anyway, let's get cracking. Let's jump into our interview. We're going to take a very quick break, and then you'll be hearing from myself and Quang while also hanging out with Mike and Gavin, which will be happening straight away if you support us on the AI and Games Patreon. If you go to aiandgames.com/Patreon, you get to listen to the podcast ad-free, you get to submit questions to us through our Discord server, and you get a bunch of bonus content as well. But for everyone else, get ready to listen to a couple of wonderful commercials that were probably done in my voice. And we're back, and this time we've got our guest with us. Please welcome Mike and Gavin from the Bitmap Bureau. As we've discussed already, the Bitmap Bureau team, you guys have been working on a whole bunch of really interesting kind of very games inspired by a lot of like classic stuff dating back, I think, to all of our collective childhoods, which is maybe sharing a little bit of our average age around here. But also, I think what's most interesting is also that you've been shipping it to half of the consoles that we actually played back in the day. So yeah, Mike, Gavin, first of all, thank you very much for joining us here on Branching Factor. Very excited to meet you both.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, man. Yeah.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about Bitmap Bureau. How did we get here? Like, how do you end up even getting started founding a company like this and moving in this particular direction for the type of games that you're making?
Well, I could go all the way back to 95 when I joined the industry, but that's a very long story. So I'll probably go back to our previous studio where that was Megadev, and we were developing Flash and Steam games. And we realized we were making 2D pixel art, sort of traditional arcade titles. And my old colleague Matt Cope, he was interested in getting back into the industry, and he's an expert in cross compilation and porting. So he was able to get our latest game, which was 88 Heroes, onto Switch, PlayStation, Xbox, and Steam, and all that. Then we had I think we made another Steam game, Ninja Showdown, which did okay. But during a game jam, we thought we'd have a go at making a Mega Drive game in the space of 48 hours. It was more like 20 hours, really, in real time. But we managed to bash out a very simple horizontal shooter. And no one at the game jam paid any interest in it at all. But to us, it was like, oh, wow, we could potentially make a decent Mega Drive game ourselves. And we'd noticed that Matt Phillips, who you might know of, I think he was Traveller's Tales previously, but he made Tanglewood for the Mega Drive and successfully kickstarted that. So, we thought we'd try and follow suit, do our own Kickstarter, which succeeded. And, we just realised we had a lot more fun making a Mega Drive game than, say, a traditional Steam game. So that was our new focus, really. But with Matt's technology and know-how, we were also able to bring those Mega Drive games to modern platforms as well. So and then it expanded from there into Dreamcast, Neo Geo, N64, you name it. So that's how it all got started, really, and that's now our niche, if you like.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm gonna, for the purposes of briefly mentioning this, I'm going to quickly jump back on and have a look at Xeno Crisis over on Steam, because I was looking at the number of platforms that it got shipped on, and I was like, this is like reading the like platform list for Doom's Wikipedia page. So it lists here, we've got the Sega Mega Drive, or the Genesis for our American friends, Linux, Mac OS, Windows, the Nintendo Switch, PS4, Xbox One, Dreamcast, PlayStation Vita, the Evercade and the Evercade VS, the Neo Geo, the Neo Geo CD, the Nintendo 64, and the GameCube.
Yeah, and we've also got PlayStation 1 and Game Boy Advance ports almost ready to go. And Gav's working on something top secret platform that we can't possibly talk about. We're not done yet. And Matt's also got some other platforms lined up. So, I think he's keen to hit every platform under the sun, just to be the first, really. And but once you've done one platform, it then means you can bring other games to those platforms. So it's a worthwhile investment, I think.
Yeah, like one of the things I was interested in from a technical perspective is, so when you start with this, like you said, like, you've already got some experience on like cross-platform development and porting to other platforms. Like, how are you even thinking about designing or implementing this at a technical level? I'm assuming this is all running off your own proprietary engine that you've built for the purposes of this, because it's not exactly like Unity has a Sega Mega Drive like plugin available for it.
That's right. I mean, initially it was a lot of guesswork, really. We kind of blagged it. We had to make sure, well, I was designing the game, but I just prototyped it in Flash very quickly, and Matt was looking over my shoulder the whole time saying, be careful with the number of sprites you got flying around there. That's not going to happen on Mega Drive. So, we ended up with two code bases, one in Hacks, and then another in C, right? C in assembler?
Yeah. It'll all be in C.
Yeah. Probably 95% C, I guess. Yeah. Really, Matt did all the hard work of getting the game onto the Mega Drive, and Gav can probably tell you a bit about some of the difficulties that involves, in terms of sprites and DMA. And
it's not really an engine like modern engines. The games are so simple. It's just pushing sprites around. So once you've got a basic thing pushing sprites, it's quite straightforward to then get it onto another platform. You just have a hardware abstraction layer and you just push it to that relevant hardware. So fortunately, the games are so simple in a way that it's not that much work to do. Yeah. No, it's we make it for a simple platform. So we know the limits. I don't think we'll get it working on old Game Boy, but watch this space.
Well, I think as someone who works on the Game Boy, I found working on that platform, the most important thing is knowing the hardware, not necessarily the programming of it. It's understanding its limitations, understanding when you can write to the hardware, what limits you can push it around with. It's understanding how it actually just renders the whole screen, more so than that's where the problems lie. I guess as you get further down the generations of consoles, they bring in bitmap modes and stuff, so it's a lot easier to render a whole screen. Whereas in the early consoles, you're dealing with individual sprites limitations. So a sprite tile is usually an 8x8 pixel tile, and then putting them together to make other sprites, and then same with the backgrounds and things like that. So porting from, I guess, from generation to generation, the earlier you go, the more difficult it gets, I believe.
Yeah, well, I don't think we're going to go back as far as a Game Boy or a Monster System or anything like that, or a C64. But
those would be cool. But,
we'll have to see.
It's probably about as far back as we go, I think.
Yeah.
Speaking of, like, how much you were saying there that Matt was kind of instrumental in that. Is that also what then influenced what platforms you targeted? Because you said there, like, we're going to make a Mega Drive-esque game. Is that also knowing, maybe in the back of Matt's head, like, kind of understanding how the Mega Drive works? Because, like, why that versus, say, the SNES, for example, like the Super Nintendo or Super Famicom, I guess, depending on where you buy your consoles.
I think it was initially down to the SGDK, wasn't it? That made life a lot easier.
So there were a nice set of dev tools that you could use, using C compiler, so you could get a game up and running on Mega Drive quite quickly, versus something like on the SNES where the tool sets aren't as well developed. So you'd have to write the whole thing in assembly or take a very poor C compiler.
Oh, good. Having flashbacks.
I found that as well. Choosing the platform is really down to the documentation that's out there, because you don't have the official documentation of these consoles. You're literally taking what the community's put together, and the Mega Drive community, homebrew community, has really matured really well in recent years.
Any particular reason for why that is, do you think? Like, from anyone here? Like, I'm because it's interesting to me as someone who's not actually programmed for anything prior to, like, Windows 98 PC, or never shipped anything. Like the most modern console I've shipped to is the Xbox One, or the youngest console I've ever shipped to is the Xbox One. So, like, for me, like, this is really interesting territory. But, like, do you think it is just down to community and how much information they can gather, and that's why, like, say, the Mega Drive is now arguably better supported?
I think for me, sorry, go ahead, please.
Plus, for me, the Mega Drive shares a processor which is used a lot across other platforms, and so you've got Amiga, Atari, VST, Neo Geo, all running the same processors. Easy to jump, whereas the SNES was a little custom, so it was a lot harder to. So maybe not as much enthusiasm behind developing all the tools for that. So that's what. Anyway, sorry for interrupting.
No, exactly what I was going to say. The Super Nintendo uses such custom chips, it's harder for them people to understand and map it. Look at the emulation software out there at the moment. The most mature ones are the ones that have been worked on the most. And Super Nintendo took a while to catch up when the NES and the Mega Drive were out a lot sooner than that.
I've learned something. Thanks for that. This is, as soon as you said, like, shared CPU, it's like, okay, right, I'm with you. But no, I didn't know any of that. That's very cool. So I guess, one of the things I was chatting about with Quang when we did our 1-to-1 episode, like, a few months back, was we were talking about then this. So you've got the challenge of shipping to these older platforms, and then of course we've kind of discussed a little bit of that, but you've also then got the challenge of just doing physical production for older systems as well, and that comes in a number of forms, whether it's the logistics of actually shipping the damn thing, but also the project quality. Like, you have to ship the game, and you can't, like, you're not going to ship out a patch cartridge like 3 months down the line. I mean, how much does that influence like the development overall?
You've got to be pretty secure or confident in your product and make sure it's been tested thoroughly before it goes out the door.
Yeah.
But then you also have all these kind of potential manufacturing woes, and you can get things that come in that aren't up to quality. And so sometimes you think it's better to do it in-house because you can kind of manage it. And I think the market's a bit niche, so it's not like we have to do hundreds of thousands of units. You know, it's manageable, but it can be a little bit tedious.
Yeah, it's pretty painful, and we've wasted so many hours and so many dollars on trying out different manufacturers and like PCB manufacturers and case manufacturers, and then once you've got it all right, you've still got to make the stuff yourself, and that's no mean feat. You've got to flash the game onto the PCB, get the PCB into the cartridge, screw it down, put the label on, Ooh. Put that in the box, put the sleeve in the box, put the manual in the box, chuck some freebies in like postcards, then wrap it up, put the sticker on it, make sure you get the right sticker, then there's the customs invoice, and then you got to put it in your bag, then you've got to tag the bag in the right way for the Royal Mail, then you've got to give it to the Royal Mail, and then you've got to notify the customer, give them their tracking details. Compared to, say, a digital game on Steam where customer gets it right away and that's it. There's no fuss. So it introduces a lot of headaches, and we've had a good few hundred hours, I think, in the warehouse just manufacturing stuff. So but we've got it down pretty well now. It's a lot smoother than it used to be. But I don't enjoy that side of the job.
It's exactly the same for me when we were putting our last game together, having to literally fold every box, fold every manual, and put them all together. This is why our new game, we've gone with a distributor to deal with that instead. So hand off the logistics to someone else, worry about making the game.
The wise move.
I was going to say, as Mike was explaining it, I could kind of see the light in your eyes go out. I was like, all right, this is clearly the bit you don't enjoy doing as part of the overall production. Just got to put the thing in the thing, and then that's got to go in that, and that's one copy, right? How many more are we going to do?
Yeah. The first few hours is fine, or then the first day, but then you realize how slow you're going and how much stuff has to be done. And you just think, okay, this is a grind. This is a proper grind that we're going to have to do.
Yeah, we have taken on people to help us out, but we still get involved because more hands make light work and all that. But it's probably the worst part of making a retro game. You do have to get stuck in with the physical manufacturing side of things. And it's like
you say, like that first one that's done, and you're like, look at that, this is amazing, this is so cool. And then after the 1500th where you're like, I don't give a shit. Put it in the envelope, we got to get it out. So how, I mean, it sounds then like sort of there's a point in production where the game is done and it's like, right, everybody tools down, we're off to the warehouse now, time to get them all in envelopes and get them all shipped out. Like, how does that feel, I guess, for yourselves? Because unlike so many other developers, if you look at, say, a contemporary game that comes out on modern platforms as a physical release, you're actually there for every single part of it, from ideation through to the physical product being sent to the customer. It just sounds baffling to me. It sounds like such a unique perspective that there's very, very few. I mean, we're fortunate to have Quang here, but I can't imagine there's many other developers that could share in that experience. Like, how many have you met? Is there like a, I don't know, Retro Game Developers Anonymous, where you all hang out and lament sticking games in envelopes?
But yeah, I can't imagine that'll appeal to that many people. When someone opens the box, one of our games, and it's got our own kind of sweat dripping on, little splats and fingerprints on there, and our floors,
COVID as well.
Yeah.
No, it's satisfying to know that you've been involved from the first line of code to actually just putting the game together in the box and sending it. I do love that, yeah. And you're right, there can't be many people in the world doing it.
It's like a bit of closure as well. Once you're at that stage, that the product, it's come to an end, that project, and so then you're kind of then thinking about what you're going to be working on next. So even then, when you're kind of making it, you think, oh yeah, I'm going to be doing that next, or we could try this thing out.
It's terrifying at the same time though, because at that point you're committed. You've written the game to the PCB, it's in the car, it's on its way to customers, and then if there's any problem, then it could potentially, I wouldn't say sink your company, but it could be fatal for some people. We did have a problem actually with the Neo Geo version. I think there was some discrepancy with the code on the flashing machine at the warehouse and the one in the office, and I think it was one bit that wasn't written, but it meant that the stereo music didn't work on the MVS version. We had to do had to come up with this cart upgrade scheme so that customers could send their cart to various trusted partners in the world to update their cart. So that was an absolute nightmare. But yeah, that's the nature of working on these old platforms, unfortunately.
And you were sorry, Quang, go ahead.
And I think we're obviously of an age where a lot of us grew up with the 8-bit micros, things like that, and that was the homebrew coder scene where that grew from. And we watched people sell games by mail order. They were doing very much the same thing of making their own games, stuffing envelopes and sending it out. I guess duplicating tapes is what they were doing back in the days. So it's great to see that come back around and be part of it. That was part of my childhood. Now I get to be involved in part of that, and as you say, seeing that whole process from code, first line of code to physical product coming out.
Yeah, like for one of the things that I was thinking about looking particularly, so I mean, for the clarity for the audience, like, Xeno Crisis was finished in 2019 and it was shipped to multiple platforms over a period of a couple of years. But then you also worked on 2 other games like Battle Axe, and then you had Final Vendetta, which came out last year, which is kind of a Final Fight Streets of Rage style game as well. But thinking about Xeno Crisis and particularly those physical releases, like 2 things that that came to my mind is, one, you shipped the original Mega Drive version in late 2019, and then you started having, and I think also the PlayStation and Xbox versions. So this was all done. Were you doing this entirely independently? Because I noticed, I think, is it Final Vendetta, Numbskull Games has published that, whereas Xeno Crisis was entirely your own. So how do you then? So you've now got this interesting challenge of managing how many different branches of the source code, or like?
Luckily, just 2. There was my sort of dirty tax version, if you like, but. There's no way that you could take that code and slap it on the Mega Drive. Matt had to basically rewrite from scratch, and then I got involved as well to try and make sure that the enemy logic was as close to the original as possible.
And then for all of the different platforms, there's a branch of the original Mega Drive version. So then Game Boy, PlayStation, all the others, there'll be a branch off of it. So if any fix goes into the core branch, it can then propagate through all of them. They all run ultimately the same set of code. It's just the rendering side and the sound triggering side and the input of controllers that come in. That there's a hardware abstraction layer. But ultimately, there's.
Sorry, having mild PTSD of trying to handle Xbox controller configurations. I guess because funnily enough, like looking at the release dates, you did ship on PlayStation, Xbox, and the Switch and this on the same day as the Mega Drive release.
I think they were a bit before, really. I think a few months before, because Matt had an accident. Actually, he injured his head, suffered concussion.
Oh, jeez.
It took him out of action for a long time, and we weren't even sure if Matt would ever get back to coding. Fortunately, he did, but that pushed the Mega Drive back probably like a good 6 to 12 months, perhaps. That's why the modern came out first, but it probably helped a bit. We were able to iron out a few bugs and a few balancing issues, and those were carried over to the Mega Drive. Ideally, it would have been good to get a Mega Drive version out first, but it just wasn't to be. But luckily Matt's okay now. That's the main thing.
Oh, glad to hear it. But like from Matt was my thought was, hang on, you're trying to do lot check on like 3 platforms, modern platforms, as well as trying to put the cartridges in the box at the same time, and so it's I'm generally just bowled away. Let's just put it that way. I shipped to like two platforms, and I was like, that was too many. Whereas you're shipping to everything at once. Yeah,
Matt's he's the master of that, really. I think we've passed lot check first time every time on all of our games. I think we failed once because we had like a tiny Xbox logo on this on the control screen, and you're not allowed to show the Xbox logo, so we had to cover it up with a couple of pixels, and that's the only reason we failed. So we've got a pretty good track record of getting products out there without too many issues, which is good, because every submission costs you a few grand, doesn't it? Or it could take a few more weeks or months. So it's nice to pass first time.
Not there yet. Not there yet, personally. But
you're talking about having to deal with the controllers. Obviously, if you're shipping a game to different platforms, and your initial control scheme was for a Mega Drive, how are you thinking about mapping these controllers to other systems and their controllers?
I think the most problematic controller was probably the Mega Drive anyway, because it was 3 buttons. Getting that control scheme working on there was quite an interesting challenge. But once you go to a modern controller where you've got 2 sticks and 4 face buttons, 4 triggers, there's not too many problems really. And actually, we're able to adapt a true sort of make it a true dual stick shooter, which the Mega Drive version wasn't, unless you're on the 6-button pad. I enjoyed that challenge of making an interesting control scheme for the original Mega Drive pad, because it's one of my favourite pads still. I think if you can make a game work on a 3-button pad, it can certainly work on. Shouldn't have too many problems on other controllers.
Right.
I imagine Game Boy is more of a challenge. You got 2 buttons. That's a real challenge.
They made ports of Metal Gear Solid and the Tomb Raider games and stuff like that running on a 2-button controller, and it's insane what you can do and what you can't do. But you have to be, I guess, come up with amazing, interesting ways to use those 2 buttons.
Yeah. Lots of context-sensitive stuff, I guess.
It's all about creative limitation, I guess, and trying to work around it. Like with regards to the games, because I've noticed having a look at a lot of the games that you're making, you are very much in keeping with that. There's a kind of old school late 80s, early 90s vibe, which I think resonates with a lot of people quite strongly, because we're all of that age, and we're of that age that we played those games at some phase in our childhood. Like, what is there a design challenge then for yourselves when you're looking at a new project, like going away and doing the research and figuring out this is the correct aspect ratio that we want to try and render the game out in, or like what type of pixel art style we're going for, what type of music are we going for, like even the mechanics and the scope of it? Do you feel like you need to still be like kind of both Xeno Crisis and Final Vendetta are kind of very reflective of games of their time? They feel like they could have been picked up in that day, rather than being more like like other indie games that are sort of paying an homage to it. You feel like Like I was playing Final Vendetta over the weekend, and I'm like, this feels like I'm just playing a Final Fight game.
Good.
And but is that like your intent? Is that you want to try and keep it as authentic to that era as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the era that I grew up in, the 80s and 90s. And for me, classic Capcom, Konami, Sega, Taito, those guys, to me, they made the best games, and that's what I try to emulate. And also, I pretty much stopped playing games probably in the early 2000s. So I don't know why. I don't even know what should go into a modern game. But but given the consoles that we're making the games for, it just feels appropriate that they have that 80s, 90s feel. It's almost inevitable, really, given my background and my stubbornness not to play anything beyond 2005. but it's I find it quite refreshing, really, because when we're making Flash games and Steam games, there's no limitations. There's nothing that says your game should be so many pixels wide or so many high. You've got infinite colors. You can throw polygons at the screen, do all this and that. But it's actually having limitations. Having to make a game for a 4:3 aspect ratio. 320 pixels across, 224 down. 16 colors per tile or whatever it is. It's I actually enjoy working to those restrictions, and it kind of informs the design as well, really. The Mega Drive's got a very gritty color palette, so it seemed appropriate that we make quite a gritty game, and Xeno Crisis just fit the mold perfectly. And again, with the Mega Drive's YM2612 Yamaha sound chip, it's an absolute beast when it comes to FM synthesis. And we found this Swedish guy called Savage Regime, who somehow was making music that I didn't think was possible on a Mega Drive. And I didn't actually believe it. I got in touch. I just said, it looks like you're making Mega Drive music, but is that actually the case? And he said, oh yeah, it's all genuine. And I said, oh wow, could you write us some music then? And he just bashed out a load of tracks in the space of a few months, and that really helped set the atmosphere and the tone and the tempo for the game, really. It all just gelled together, and especially with Henk Nieborg's art, he's an absolute pixel master. So lucky to have him on board, and Catherine Manabde as well on the cutscene art. So it was a good team, and just one of those situations where everything just gels together nicely, and we're all really happy with the end product.
Amazing stuff. I guess, I mean, on that note, because you were saying that you're very faithful to it, what is, I guess for both of you, what is your favorite game of the retro era? Like, what's your favorite game? What's your console? I mean, it sounds like Mega Drive might be the console, but what's the do we have an answer for that?
I would, if you put it on me, I would go with the Game Boy. The Game Boy, I have so much love for the Game Boy. It was like the first console that was mine, and I didn't have to share with my brothers. Gotcha. And because it's such a personal console, you take it with you everywhere. I grew up with a huge bond with my Game Boy. As for my favorite game, it has to be Tetris. Tetris is such an incredible game from a gameplay standpoint, because obviously it's just a few blocks falling down. But the game is so pure. It's literally just, it is what it is. You run on any system because it doesn't need anything fancy bells or whistles. It's a pure gameplay driven game. So for me, it's Tetris on the Game Boy.
Don't Gav.
I kind of missed the whole the consoles. My first machine was an Atari ST, and so I would be playing games on that. So it'd be SimCity and some of the LucasArts games, Monkey Island, things like that.
Dungeon Master was cool.
Nice.
So fond memories of Monkey Island and things like that. I like the 68K, anything that kind of 68K goes into. So that's why I'm happy working on Mega Drive and Neo Geo and things like that. So that was for me. What about yourself, Paul?
I think the game I probably put the most hours into, much like Quang, is Street Fighter 2. I know he's played it a lot. But I used to play that religiously every day for hours a day, whether I was at college in the recreation centre where they had a machine, or as soon as I got home, I'd carry on playing it. And I made a lot of friends playing it. And it was, I think it's one of the few times like where you see a queue for a video game. You just don't see that anymore. And you have these big crowds around the machine, and there was so much drama watching some of these fights play out. Someone actually physically attacked me after I beat them on the college machine. But we became good friends after that. We kind of laughed it off. But to me, that's pretty much video gaming perfection, really. Capcom at their best. Great pixel art, beautiful soundtrack, and gameplay, which people are still finding little exploits and glitches and tricks in the Street Fighter games, 30 years on, which is amazing, really. So Street Fighter, probably an obvious choice, but I still love it today.
I mean, I'm probably with you. Also, for our audio listeners, Mike is wearing a Street Fighter T-shirt, which also might have gave it away a little bit. But no, I mean, I'm in the same boat. Like, actually, mine's a Street Fighter 2 Turbo specifically. Because also the Super Nintendo was my first console that was mine. I used to play games on my dad's Amstrad CPC 464, and then I got an SNES, and Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Because also, again, it was a communal thing. There was a handful of places near where I lived where there was an arcade machine. The swimming pool, the local swimming pool, had an arcade machine of Street Fighter, and we used to wait. Like, all these school trips would go to go and do a swim, and then we'd all be waiting for the bus, and a handful of us that had like money in our pocket would be like, you, me, let's go Street Fighter, and have a couple of rounds. So I made a few enemies in other schools, but that was a bit. But yeah, it's a communal experience. Also, I love for anyone who's picked up Street Fighter 6, I was playing that last week. There is an arcade. There's like an area of the like social hub where they actually have all these full arcade machines set up where you can just go and play Street Fighter 2.
Oh, wow.
In Street Fighter 6. And I was like, that's so nice. Like, you can just go over and play that, or like Final Fight and like Ghouls and Goblins and stuff like that. So it's like, I can't be bothered fighting people. I'm just going to sit over here and play Street Fighter 2 for a bit. It's like, put more in. I'll pay DLC. Just put the ROMs in for all the other games, and I'll just sit and spend a lot of time playing old games on this new game. But anyway,
just need a arcade, don't you?
That's it. I need an arcade machine. I just keep seeing Quang Street Fighter arcade machine behind me, and I'm like, man, I just need a piece of that. That's just Quang, you and I still haven't played Street Fighter together yet.
We have actually
one time. Remember?
Last time
we were at the Cambridge Computing Museum, and like half the buttons didn't work.
Yeah.
And so we were like both trying to do moves, but I think like my medium punch and like hard kick didn't work, and like your heavy punch and medium kick didn't work, and then the two of us are trying to dance around each other.
It's not really a match.
Can't remember who won anyway.
I went to a tournament like that, and you couldn't jump forwards. And we said to the organizer, so how's this gonna work? And they said, if you just switch sides each round, that will even it out. So it's annoying when you come across a cab that's not set up properly, especially in a proper competition setup. It's frustrating.
But yeah, I guess looking back, maybe perhaps this is one of our closing questions for you, is looking back then on those games, and having now worked on games that have subsequently launched on the same platforms. Does that give you kind of any newfound appreciation for any specific system or specific game that you remember from that era of like, oh my God, how did they do that? Like doing it back in the day versus you trying to do it now with like a bit more like knowledge and with hindsight. I guess, is there any games that you look back on now with kind of wonder or newfound appreciation?
Looking at them, I do appreciate all the work that went into them. But with the hindsight, you can look at the tools and see how they actually did some of these tricks. So you put them into an emulator, and you go, okay, now I see what you did. That was really cunning. And with the tools that we have access to now, we were able to recreate these things. But back in the day, they were coming up with these ideas, and just throwing it out there, but we can just utilize them as if it was a library now and go, oh, there's an effect from this one. We can pinch that and let's see how they did it, and we just put it into an emulator. So I think it'll speed up our development and make the games a little bit more polished now. But I think it's great just looking back at all these things. Specific titles, I don't know, like Toy Story and Batman on SNES, look back on Mega Drive. There's some pretty nice effects that went on in those.
Yeah, I think Traveller's Tale did some crazy stuff. Was it the Batman and Robin?
Yeah,
Adventures of Batman and Robin. There's a real technical showcase.
Yeah, I was a sucker for those things. I used to just love the tech. I wasn't so much into the gameplay. I was just wooed by shiny things. Yeah. So, and I still am. So I was just like, all right, how do they do that? All right, figure it out.
Yeah, I was always impressed by some of the RPGs, like the Ultima series and Bard's Tale, Starflight as well, and Elite, and just how they could make these huge immersive worlds on just a couple of floppy disks. That still impresses me now. And but also games like I think Metal Slug, which have such a high level of pixel art. Yeah, the amount of detail, the number of frames. We try and match that, and I can't imagine how many artists they must have had on those games back in the day. I think also, a lot of the developers like Capcom and Konami, I'm sure they must have been under a huge amount of pressure to produce these titles. So with very difficult, technical constraints and budget constraints and memory constraints. We're not subjected to anything like what they were. So just anything from the 80s and 90s, it just really impresses me. I know some of those ports, especially for the microcomputers, they had to be bashed out in a few weeks. I've got a lot of respect for those guys and girls, of course.
I'd say what Gavin was saying about now running these old games in emulators, you can actually see what the tricks they were doing. You can see the tile maps, you can see what ROM banks and stuff like that. You can see them switching. And there are still a handful of games that I've seen that I still don't understand how they've done it. It's just incredible. Like you guys, I wrote my stuff in C with a handful of assembly. So the stuff that they're doing is like, I can't even see how it's even possible to get that done in the amount of time you have per scan line. But they're doing it anyway, and there's some incredible coders out there who just do amazing stuff. Even with the tools that we have now, I don't know how you would do it. I guess one of the big things about making games for systems now is the cost of ROM is cheaper than it used to be, because a lot of the early Mega Drive games, I know they came on 2 or 4 megabyte ROMs, which is a shame, because you think if they had an 8 megabyte ROM or 16 megabyte ROM, it would have been so much better. They put more in it, but because the cost of the chips, it was just too expensive to do it. So it'd be nice to see if they could have made, I don't know, something like Shadow Dancer or Shinobi or eSWAT, something like that now rather than back then, and you could see what they could have done with it if the cost of ROM wasn't as expensive as it was.
Like that, there were UV erasable ones as well. So not only when you programmed it, you had to put it into a drawer and let it sit and bake under UV light for half an hour before you could reprogram the thing. So you'd be like, oh no, I just put the wrong thing in. I have to wait another hour before I can test it out. Whereas now you can get little flash chips and just go program, even have it hooked up to your computer, just have it like live sending stuff over to a cartridge. So it's so easy. We get it so easy nowadays. And it's so cheap.
What's the going rate for a cartridge these days? Getting all the chips involved and getting them on the PCB.
If it's a single flash, then you're going to be talking maybe a couple of pounds, but you'll probably need depending on the hardware, you might need a level translator. So you'll have to go from 5 volt to 3.5 volt, because the new chips will be on 3.3 volts. So you're talking maybe £1 for that chip, and the circuit as well. So, maybe £4 or £5 in total to get a basic cart up and running. Probably get it done cheaper, but because we're just dealing in small volumes, we get 10 of them made up just to try it out and see how it goes. Then it'd be about £10 a board. But when you get to volume, you're getting down to like a couple pounds.
Mega Drive for the price of a Tesco meal deal.
Well, there's all the rest. I think it's the development side of things that probably that costs a lot of money, doesn't it? Just making the game,
building
it. Yeah, the man hours,
putting it all together.
Yeah,
sticking the labels on it.
By the end of it, you make about 50p a game or something. Yeah. It's not that bad.
But yeah, speaking of, what are we? Do we know? Is there anything we can glean from you as to what's happening next? Where are we going to see you next? What are you working on at the moment?
Ourselves, we've got so frustrating. We've got two high-profile projects underway, looking really good, but we're under NDA, so can't talk about them.
Ooh.
Gav is working on like our biggest port yet, I would say, a real big popular platform. Can you give a little clue? Would we get in trouble?
No. Talking a little bit about the platform during the course of the talks here, but
Jaguar,
yeah. We're probably a couple of weeks off before we'll announce it. So the talk here was probably 2 weeks too early before we could have maybe released some information about
That's nice. We might actually get this episode out just in time for it being announced, and then people can put it together when they see it in the news afterwards.
But yeah, we've got other opportunities lined up as well. So yeah, the studio's in a really good place, and lots of exciting things happening.
Yeah, lots of hardware sitting around, lots of things to play with, and ports to work on. So yeah, we're well busy working lots and having fun doing it.
Well, most of the time.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. Like, do you think then that actually doing all of the retro hardware stuff, specifically Mega Drive and everything else, do you think that has helped elevate your standing as an independent developer versus a lot of others? Like, funnily enough, when Quang and I were having a chat about his work, like one of the things we discussed is that doing retro gaming is interesting in that you're kind of not fighting or competing with all the other indies, which, everyone's friends, but at the same time, we're all trying to ship, we're one of the other 7,000 games that came out on Steam this week. So you're trying to compete in that market. So moving over to retro, it's a smaller competitive space, but it's still a competitive space. Do you think that's helped elevate your overall perspective or position in the market as a result of that? Do you think publishers and the like are paying closer attention to you?
Yeah, that's it. I think it gave us a niche and gave us a bit of publicity because although Matt Phillips has got there before and what they call Watermelon and a few others, we wanted to just put ourselves on the map by making you could call it a AAA Mega Drive game if you want to think of it like that, but just a real quality Mega Drive game that would have hopefully have been well received back in the 80s, 90s. And it meant that a lot of YouTubers and influencers picked up on it. And since then, we had various publishers come to us. So, Numbskull came to us. Well, we were already working with Rising Star, but the CEO, I think, went to Numbskull. So we already had a relationship there. But we just, I think it was last year or the year before, we had another big UK publisher come to us with these two deals that we're currently working on. It's that might have happened anyway, who knows, but it's certainly not done us any harm, and we're going to continue to support the retro platforms for a long time yet. And I think the next year or two, there should be some real big announcements from us in terms of the games and the platforms we're supporting. So hopefully our profile will just continue to rise and we can continue making games and enjoy doing it.
Fantastic. Well, I think, speaking for us both, I think we're super excited to see what comes next. And we'll be sure to, for everyone listening to the podcast, we'll point them to all of your stuff and make sure they go and check out all the games that you guys have shipped already. But thank you so much for joining us. Very excited to see what comes from you in the future. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat with us. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.
All right. And there we go. That was our interview with Mike and Gavin from over at the Bitmap Bureau. I think that went pretty well. I really enjoyed that. Quang, how are you feeling about that?
Oh, that was great. They're an amazing studio, and the stuff they're doing is just incredible. And That's so humble as well.
Yeah.
It's great what they're doing.
Like it is quite, from a technical perspective, it's kind of mind blowing. And actually, just there was a very small thing that came up in the conversation that I didn't bring it up, but at the time I was like, I hadn't even thought of this. You were talking about the control schemes and running it on the Mega Drive. I've been playing Xeno Crisis for the last week or so on the Switch.
Yeah,
and it's a 4-button game on the Switch.
It is,
and I'm running it on 2 sticks. And then I'm like, oh my God, this originally shipped on the fucking Mega Drive. How do you control this game? So you guys were talking about, the design affordances and how you work around only dealing with the 3-button. And I don't know, maybe people who are watching the video can actually see me just dying a little inside as I'm like, oh my God, I'm struggling to play this thing with a twin stick I was playing it on a freaking Pro controller. And those, full credit, actually, their games are really tough.
They're old school hard.
Old school hard, yeah. Like I was kind of surprised by it because I started playing it and it's like it comes in 2 difficulty modes, easy and hard, and then like I think there's a harder difficulty you can only unlock after hard is completed. Yeah. And I'm like, easy and hard. All right, we'll give it a shot. And after about 10 minutes in hard, I was like, oh God, right, okay, hang on, I maybe need to go and play it on easy first. But playing it with the luxury of a 4-button face controller with shoulders and triggers as well, versus like trying to play it on a Mega Drive controller.
Yeah.
I could just feel my hands clawing up. And that was always my problem with the Mega Drive. My hands clawed up.
I guess everyone has their favorite controller, and it's one that fit the hands well, and you could press all the buttons that had been an issue. I thought the Mega Drive controller was quite comfortable in its kidney shape. Obviously, depending on how you hold it, either it's face down or with your thumbs.
Yeah, holding it with the finger. Yeah.
Yeah. The Sega Saturn controller is probably one of my favorites. But I would hold out with the thumb on the D-pad and fingers on the base buttons because you play fighting games. This is the best way to do it. But yeah, it all depends on the game stuff. So finding the controller that's right for you and right for your hands, it was very personal. And Mega Drive 1 wasn't for everyone, I guess.
No, it took me a little bit of, I think by that point, I think my hands were just so used to the SNES controller. Like I just got used to that bean shape pad.
Yeah.
Now, if I try and pick it up, it's like my hands are too big. I'm just like, I seem to be going through this crisis with a lot of consoles where I'm just like, I don't like this controller. Like, I've got the 8-bit Do for my PC, and I quite like that. That's a nice controller. But I've discovered I hate all PlayStation controllers. This is a recurring.
Same for me. I'm not a big fan of the PlayStation controllers. I'll take the Xbox ones over the PlayStation ones. Sure.
I think the Xbox controllers are like that's why I like this the Pro Switch controller, because it's like, this almost feels like an Xbox pad. Like that white Xbox 360 pad, they just solved it. Like that's it. Yeah. Like every time they're just adding more bells and whistles. That's it. They solved the controller problem as far as I'm concerned.
I'm not a fan of offset analog sticks. So weirdly, I like the PlayStation's analog sticks because they're the same height, but I hate the PlayStation's D-pad. It's terrible for fireballs and things like that. So it's a mix and match.
Funnily enough, I remember like we'll probably have you and me will need to have a Street Fighter conversation at some point because I think that'd be good podcast content. But I was playing. So Street Fighter 5, I remember playing on PC. It's the only game on Steam I've ever refunded because I was so angry with how shoddy that Street Fighter 5 release was. But I ended up buying the super arcade, every character and skin edition on the PS4, or actually it was on my PS5. And I'm trying to play it on my PlayStation controller. I'm like, I hate this. This is terrible. And then I've been playing Street Fighter 6 on the Xbox controller and it's not there. It's bugging me, and that way I'm now like, do I need to get my first arcade stick? Do I need to? Because I've never actually owned an arcade stick, but I've always been able to figure out how to just play fighting games on the respective controllers. But I feel like none of them are particularly good for fighting games right now.
Oh. No, I grew up playing Street Fighter in the arcades, so I need a fighting stick to play
on the streets.
Properly. On the streets. Although, it was spent many hours on Super Nintendo version, so I can play on pad, but it's a very different type of play. Because I map the medium text to show the buttons and the face buttons light and heavy, which means I rely on those more than the mediums.
That for many years messed me up because I realized I wasn't using the mediums correctly. Because it's like, because you can use medium kicks a lot to give you a lot of range, or like actually like you can do a 1-2 with a light medium or something that you wouldn't think to do versus like a light heavy. And it took me a long time to kind of like unlearn some very bad habits. I think this was during my Street Fighter 4 era, where that was the last time I tried to get really good at a fighting game. Who knows? Street Fighter 6, it might happen.
Get a stick.
Get a stick. All right, fine. Well, we'll come back to this at some point, I imagine. But yeah, so thanks once again to Mike and Gavin for coming and joining us. I really enjoyed having a chat with them. And also just, for me, the other funny thing was when there was certain aspects of the conversation where I could just see it creeping up on your face, where it's like, oh, we talked about this on our episode, and you could just see you like, yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Like the bit about trying to put the logistics together of here's one copy of the game, so the control there, we've got the cartridge, and we put that in, and we got the sleeve, we got the thing, and then stick it in the envelope and everything else, and I could just see you like
flashbacks.
But you're not dealing with that issue this time, are you? You said
no. That's someone else's problem now.
Just the joys of the game. Just the joys of making the game. Just like 99% of game developers. I mean, is there anything from that conversation that you learn or you glean from? Is there anything like, because you said like yourself, like these guys are very well versed in this space. Like, do you feel like there's something you still learn from hanging around with them? Not necessarily in the podcast, but even in other spaces, just chatting with them, like kind of their approach.
Yeah, it's obviously interesting to talk to other people and see how they're doing it. Because doing homebrew, especially, it's quite a solitary adventure. You have the online chats and stuff with other people, and asking questions and stuff. But the nitty gritty of it, you don't really get to it unless you talk to a person in person.
Yeah,
talk to a person in person. No, sorry. Talk to them face to face, and then. Yeah, just seeing how other people deal with the process and deal with the systems and stuff, and deal with the community and deal with just everything to do with something that you're not normally doing. But I imagine the same is the same with working in AAA and doing other indie stuff.
Yeah,
you work in your own little studio and you do your things the way your studio does it. You don't really hear how other people do it as well. It's quite interesting to hear that.
Like, funnily enough, I had a similar experience doing console port work at one point, when I'm literally just like, okay, we're shipping a game to this platform for the first time, and you've got documentation. It's not great. It's prone to change. It often gets very out of date because they keep updating the API every 12 minutes. But also you're under NDA, and so you can't. I remember a couple of times on projects, just like, I am really flummoxed trying to figure out how to get this feature to be implemented, and who do you talk to? And I won't name names, but I did actually manage to reach out to a couple of people on Twitter via DM that we both know, some mutual friends who'd also shipped to those platforms, and they were like, "Oh, hey, here's a few things that you should know." And one of them was a game changer. Like, literally, he told me this one thing, and he said, "Oh, by the way, don't ever try and do this using this approach that's available in the API. Don't ever do it that way because it will never work. You got to do it this way and configure this with this configuration and parameters." And I was like, oh my God, I'd spent like a week trying to figure this out, or 2 weeks even trying to figure that out. And I was losing the will to live. And you're like, who do I talk to about these issues? So yeah, I think that's, to me, one of the most scariest aspects of doing homebrew is, it's such a small community. And if you're on your own, then you're like, oh, how do I do this? I don't understand what's going on. Anyway, this is just giving me PTSD from that. We have a big shout out and a lot of love to all you porting houses out there who do all the hard work of taking our busted games and getting them running on other platforms. We salute you. All right. I think with that, we should bring this episode to a close. Thank you for watching and or listening to us here on Branching Factor episode 007. Once again, be sure to rate our podcast on your platform of choice. This helps us a lot. allows people to know that we're out here and they should be listening to us. And of course, do the likes and the shares on all the appropriate platforms too. If you have any questions or comments for us, please feel free to reach out to us. Our email address is branchingfactor@aiandgames.com. You can also, we've got a brand new shiny, where actually I think Branching Factor is about to roll out more social media platforms. We just got our own Instagram. I believe we're going to have a Facebook page pretty soon, and probably a Twitter handle too, which will update very soon. But if it's not on Twitter yet, just check out AI and Games, because we're also publishing over there. And of course, a thank you to our crowdfunding community over on Patreon, the AI and Games Patreon, who support all this shenanigans and make sure that we are able to still come here and do these silly episodes because y'all love listening to them. And a shout out, of course, to our top tier patrons. So that would be to Scuppy Pup, Bernard Werner, and to Michael Russell. They are top tier supporters and they get a shout out at the end of every episode. But in the meantime, if you want to listen to episodes ad free, if you want to listen to them in early access, if you also want to get the podcast preamble and all the bonus content, then you head on over to aiandgames.com/Patreon. And you can find out how for just a couple of bucks you can support us and everything we're doing both on AI and Games and on Branching Factor. And yeah, I think that's it. Are we good? Are we good to play the music, Quang?
Play the music.
We're going to play the music. Well, Quang, thank you very much, sir, for joining us on this episode. It's been a blast to catch up with you. And of course, I thank you once again to the team over at the Bitmap Bureau. Yeah, that's it. Branching Factor, signing off. Thanks for watching, and we'll see y'all soon. Bye.
Bye.
The Branching Factor podcast is hosted and produced by me, Tommy Thompson, with support from Anne Sullivan, George Osborne, Mike Cook, and Quang Yun. Our theme music is provided courtesy of Ben Ridge, and the logo and thumbnail art is thanks to Helen O'Dell. Special thanks to Shraddha Gupta and Phoebe Trigg for their additional production support, and of course, to all of you out there listening. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Branching Factor. Wherever you are in the world, be sure to stay safe, have fun, and we'll be back.